Mr Chair.
Claire Curran.
No, for goodness sake, I was right.
Mr Chair, I'd also, with regard to Part 5, which provides for the temporary process for licensing the sale and supply of liquor, in the context of the particular hosting responsibilities relating to the Rugby World Cup, I'd like to also make mention of what a number of my colleagues have talked about around the vessels, the containers or the receptacles which contain the said liquor. And I'd like to comment on the fact that whilst my colleague Trevor Mallard expressed his pickiness at the said receptacles, I'm not particularly, and I'd like to say that I'm not particularly picky about the receptacle in which the liquor is held. Personally, I'm more picky about the liquor itself and the quality of that liquor. But I do think, on a more serious note, that this is an important issue because, as my colleague Ian Lees-Galloway has pointed out, that there are a number of issues associated, and as we know from past experience, and some of which that I've witnessed myself, where people have liquor sold to them and where they become inebriated, where they get into a state of excitability, where they use the receptacles as missiles. And this is an important issue, and it's certainly something that does need to be taken into account. I also note what my colleague Trevor Mallard said about this issue being subject to a conscience vote, and that is an important issue, and it certainly is something that that's the whole of New Zealand is having a lot of discussion about at the moment on the wider issues of liquor and its effect on our society. I want to make a couple of comments about two particular aspects. One is around the venues, which I don't think actually has been talked about too much, about the kinds of venues in which liquor will be sold and which licences will be sought for liquor to be sold during the World Cup. And I'd like to make particular mention of some of the discussion that's been happening in Dunedin around what the rugby fans could be watching, how the rugby fans, and not just in Dunedin but right around the country, where these games aren't being taken place, but the venues in which people will be watching those games and which liquor licences will be sought for. And some of those venues will, and there's quite an interesting discussion that's going on around Dunedin rugby fans who could be watching Rugby World Cup final in 3D on a big screen at the new Forsyth Bar Stadium in Dunedin from the comfort of a cinema seat. And I note also that there's discussion about cinema lines around the country actually looking at hosting some of these matches in cinemas. And you've got to ask yourself, will liquor be sold in those venues? And presumably there will be. I regret to advise the member that I must stop her there because it's time for me to report progress. The time has come.
House is resumed. Mr Chairman.
Mr Speaker, the Committee on the Rugby World Cup 2001 Empowering Bill reports progress. Mr Speaker, I move that the report be adopted.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary will say no. The ayes have it. This bill is set down for further consideration in committee next sitting day. The House stands adjourned until 2 p.m. tomorrow.